you can get the effect of the GLP-1 agonist without the gastric paralysis.
It just, not everyone needs to go there if it's not suitable. Not that it's something that I would judge someone for. There's certain clients who have severe type 2 diabetes where they're at risk of kidney damage, and that might be a great drug for them if they're not going to make the lifestyle changes. But for those of us who are pre-diabetic, who have PCOS, insulin resistance, and you're right there, you just need that help because you genuinely are having trouble with your appetite hormones and you're feeling way hungrier than the people around you because your appetite hormones are off. Start with these herbal things first to help regulate that satiety and regulate that hormonal picture.
Hey guys, welcome back. You're listening to the Anxious Health Podcast. I am so stoked about our guest today. She's somebody that I have been following for years. I've learned so much from her. She's an excellent communicator. And I know that if you're following our show, you know we talk a lot about herbs. So this podcast is going to take it to another level because our expert and our guest today is Organic Olivia. I'm sure many of you probably know her on Instagram as Organic Olivia, but it's Olivia Amatrano. She is a clinical herbalist. To me, she is like the herb girl. She knows all things related to herbs, but she also understands how to use them, how to cycle them, and how to address the things that you're facing, the symptoms, utilizing nature's best medicine, which is herbs. So if you've heard us talk in other shows about using herbs for different things, we're going to actually broaden your understanding of why herbs are the most appropriate for helping restore balance and how you can do that practically. And so I'm so excited because she's so fun. She has amazing hair, which I've already told her, I need the secrets on all of that. Because I mean, you could just tell you're so bubbly and you relate so much to your audience. I'm just so thrilled to have you here as a guest. So Olivia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Courtney. It's such an honor to be on Ancient Health Podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was talking to her beforehand, guys, because I've been actually using her herbs for a long time. She has a line of incredible herbs. But what I wanted to start with you, Olivia, because you have been in this for a while now, what have you learned about herbs when it comes to reversing disease patterns, improving just the overall health and balance of our bodies? Because I mean, the supplement world is wild and crazy. Like, what sets herbs apart when it comes to healing chronic disease or patterns of disease?
Yeah. I think when you first get started in the herb world with curiosity, and when you're at that surface level, or when you're looking at supplements as like X being a Band-Aid for Y, and you're using that allopathic model, I think it's easy to get caught up in thinking that there is a specific herb for this condition and it's going to match it and reverse it on the spot. And that is really not how herbs work, because one person could have insomnia, let's say. They can be struggling with insomnia for years and years, and the cause of their insomnia is totally different from another person's root cause. And so really what I've learned is that herbalism is about seeing the individual, really kind of like mapping out your life, taking stock of your individual pillars of health and where you might be struggling underneath the surface, and then entering a relationship with herbs and understanding their specific indications for how they can support you on that deeper level rather than just acting like a Band-Aid. So for one person, for example, blood sugar issues, actually blood sugar dysregulation may be something that's waking them up in the middle of the night, that's creating blood sugar crashes or blood sugar lows in the middle of the night, causing nightmares, or having them get up to pee in the middle of the night, because when your blood sugar drops really low, your cortisol can spike to try to help you release more glucose from the liver. And so that person who's getting up to pee and is having trouble with really disruptive dreams and insomnia, they may need to correct their blood sugar dysregulation, and they're suddenly going to have the most magical sleep. But for another person, it's that their hormones are dysregulated. It's that they're totally bottomed out and overstimulated and overworked, and they'd be a much better candidate for adaptogens that can help to reset their circadian rhythm and really nourish what we'd call in Chinese medicine their kidney yin and their blood, and help them to have deeper, more restful sleep because they have more reserves, because sleep is an energy-driven activity actually. There's a lot of detoxification and clearing going on while we sleep, so we need energy to do it. So those two people would have a totally different kind of battle plan plan for how they utilize herbalism, but the end result would be better sleep.
Okay, this makes sense. And it also brings up the question about classification of herbs, because many of our listeners, including myself, are familiar with adaptogens because a lot of people have a problem balancing stress levels. Like I feel like many of us just run in the culture of just being fast paced. And so it's like, okay, well, if I'm not going to amp myself up on caffeine, then I need to be able to have something to tonify that stress response in my body. So if there's got to be other classifications, I'm sure too. So maybe just walk us through so we can understand, because I think maybe the ones that are most familiar are something like ashwagandha, for stress, but there's a lot more there. So I want to make sure we kind of cover our grounds, because I think herbs sometimes just don't get the highlight. They don't get the notoriety that they deserve, because sometimes we see a lot of other trendy products that kind of fill in the gaps, but herbs really can be heavy hitters if you know what you're using.
Absolutely. Adaptogens are a really wonderful class of herbs. They're very widely applicable. I think that that's why they're kind of so famous in the wellness world, because they are food-like roots. Ashwagandha is a root. You can eat or consume or take very large quantities of it because it is essentially a food. By nature, adaptogens are non-toxic, and therefore they are usually prescribed in larger doses. It takes more of a dose to really have an effect, because more of their effect is nutrient driven. So you need more of that plant to actually experience the modulatory effects. And they are meant to increase our resilience in the face of stress. They're able to help us be with a greater amount of stress in our lives without that stress knocking us out of homeostasis. And when you look at the science and you look at how are adaptogens actually doing this in a modern lens, we see that adaptogens do things like activate our heat shock proteins, which is really interesting. Those are the proteins that are activated when we're in a sauna, right? And a sauna is sort of like a short-term hermetic stressor. It's a stressor that knocks us out of balance for a little bit, but ultimately makes us stronger for it. And that's kind of how adaptogens work. And so because they increase our capacity for stress, and because they also help to reset our circadian rhythm, we end up having a lot more energy at the right times of the day. So whenever I see someone who is always wired and tired, they're like, you know what, I am exhausted all day. I'm dragging myself through the day. And then all of a sudden, when like 8 p.m. hits, 9 p.m. hits, I get a second wind. And that's when I want to do everything and be productive. They're a perfect candidate for adaptogens. Sometimes they just need a reset for that cortisol rhythm. And they might just be, again, overworked, overexhausted. And so they're an adaptogen kind of person. But someone else who needs to sort of change the way that they perceive stress in their minds would be a better candidate for a class of herbs called nervines, let's say. Because really, when we look at stress, what stresses one person out doesn't necessarily stress the next person out. We all have different perceptions and different capacities. And so when we look at the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, which is how the body kind of digests and receives stress, it does start in the hypothalamus. It starts in the brain with how we perceive the stressors and events in our lives. And when we approach a problem, or when we approach, a deadline at work from a lens of a very stressed nervous system and very stressed neurotransmitters and a lot of tension, and this mental perception that this is stressful because we're already in that activated state, that deadline becomes stressful. But if we're able to approach that deadline from a more relaxed mental state, from a brain that has a lot more GABA in it, that's like, you know what, I'm going to have fun with this deadline. This is just a part of life, easy breezy, I'm going to let it roll off my back. That thing does not feel as stressful, and it does not seem as stressful to our hypothalamus. Thus, it doesn't activate our adrenals as much. So for that person, maybe they need some kava root, right? That's a nervine that helps with performance anxiety. Maybe they need some passion flower. That is a nervine, an anxiolytic and anxiety reducing herb that helps to promote higher levels of GABA in the brain, so that once they get to their desk, they're kind of feeling groovy. They're like, all right, I'm going to approach this workday with fun and ease, and I'm just going to not feel as heavy about the things on my to-do list. And even that can just change our bodily experience and our production of cortisol. So that's adaptogens, that's nervines, two totally different, quote, stress-reducing herbs that act in different ways. And then we have so many other classes of herbs. We have bitters, like digestive bitters, for example, which help us to produce more hydrochloric acid and more digestive enzymes. So we would take those digestive bitters before a meal to prep our digestion. And sometimes poor digestion can actually be a stressor on the body, right? And so by just optimizing our digestive capacity, we can reduce our stress. We have hepatic bitters or cholagogues, which are herbs that help the liver, help our detoxification pathways, help with our digestion of fats. There's so many different classes of herbs, and it's just knowing the body and what you need when deciding what to use.
Gosh, that's such a good breakdown. And it makes me curious about the synergistic impact of some of these together. Are there herbs that are complementary to one another that you feel like you would always put together to improve the efficacy or potency or effect of it? Or are there herbs that you feel like, oh, it's better to use a singular herb? Because I do know, like Dr. Motley talks a lot, about using specific herbs and not overwhelming, especially somebody that is like really ramped up. There's like, they don't even have the ability to really like break down or process a whole lot. So like, what is your position on that? Or what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And that really goes back to how my teachers and my elders taught me, which is that it's about matching the plant to the person, not necessarily, again, looking at the disease and saying, well, these 5 herbs can be good for this disease. That's like such an allopathic model. It's matching the personality of the plant to the personality of the person. And a lot of times we'll find that one singular plant has dual or far more than just 2 actions. It has a whole lot of actions under its belt. So I was actually just reviewing a monograph for an herb called agrimony this morning for someone that I'm working with. And agrimony is a really interesting herb because it is a nervine. It does help to calm tension and calm something that we call wind, sort of in the upper part of the body from the head and the neck up. So when someone has this windy tension and constriction, they always have a stiff neck and they always have a tight jaw, or they find themselves holding their breath when they're stressed. This is a very highly specific indication that agrimony is probably the correct nervine for that person. But it goes a lot deeper too, right? So agrimony has this dual action of being a beautiful hepatic bitter. It's a beautiful herb for liver wind or liver constriction, which in Western terms would sort of be like sluggish liver detoxification pathways. And it can really help when someone needs liver support in excreting toxins, hormones, endogenous things like histamine during allergy season, let's say. Liver sluggishness can be a root cause of that. And so this is an herb where if someone is presenting, they could use some liver support, they could use some mood support, and they could also use support for physical tension that's getting in the way of their life because they're always having jaw and neck pain. Agrimony is really the personality that would fit that person best. And you go even deeper as you get to know the herb and as you look to the traditional kind of folkloric texts, because that's so much of what herbalism is. It's not just the science. Again, it's the spirit and the personality of the plant. And you find that for years and years and years, they would write about agrimony being used for people who kind of have this underlying sensation of anger, right? This kind of like anger that they're holding in, they're holding their breath because they're not necessarily speaking their truth, or they're not expressing their anger in some ways. Or, they're maybe reaching for alcohol or other substances to help stuff that anger down. So then you go further, as a clinician into your relationship with the client, and you see, oh yeah, this person is also struggling with some anger underneath the surface. You're kind of reading between the lines of what they're saying, or maybe they're telling you flat out, I often feel angry and resentful in my relationships. And you're like, yes, this is an agrimony person. And then you can just start with that one single herb and see how it starts to shift things.
The emotional aspect is so wild to me because that is something that's super unique, I believe, with herbs. Like when we talk about supplements and nutrients and things like that, nobody's really talking about the emotional impact and the organs and how it's how the person and the person's behaviors and some of the things that they're feeling influence the way that the herbs are utilized, like the mechanism of action. That's so unique. And I want to ask this because I imagine that if you're listening, you're probably like, okay, this is amazing, but I have no idea how to know which herb would be right for me. Like, do I need to go to herbalism school? Like, is there a simplified way for somebody that wants to utilize herbs for them to feel confident? Or is it something where you're like, hey, if you really want to be accurate with this, you need to work with somebody that's trained in it? Or is there a way for the average person to say, hey, like, Albizia is the right one for you, or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think there's so much to be said for self-study and curiosity. Herbalism really is your birthright. It's the people's medicine. It's not meant to be gatekept in any kind of way. So self-study, reading the books that are out there by really passionate, reputable herbalists, like Robin Rose Bennett comes to mind. She has a really beautiful book about making medicine and different classes of herbs and whatnot. And just kind of learning in that way, and even just getting to know your local plants, your local weeds, your nutritive weeds, and getting to know nutritive plants is a really good place to start and just start experimenting, especially because, again, these more nutritive plants, whether they're adaptogens or whether there's something like nettle or oat straw that you consume for the mineral content, they're not going to be producing any kind of like major side effects or have a lot of risk. It's very low risk, high reward, and a good way to start your journey with plant medicine. But if you're looking to utilize plant medicine to shift things clinically, for long-standing issues that you're having, to really make changes on blood work and help with bringing down your entire picture of disease, you'd want to work with a trained herbalist that has that relationship with the plants, that can look at you and already start to match you to the personality of the herb and say, oh, I know that herb so well that I can see it in this person, and I know that they'd kind of be friends. So I would recommend going to the American Herbalist Guild. You can go to the AHG website and you can look up a clinician near you that's registered. Not all herbalists are registered with the American Herbalist Guild. That's like a whole process that you have to go through to become an RH, but that's just a good database to start with. Or you can look at, for example, my school, Arbor Vitae. It's a beautiful 3-year clinical program that I completed. They even have free clinics that they offer with 3rd-year students. That's how I did my clinical practice, was through our free clinic. And so you can look up herb schools and see if they have free clinics available and start to work with an herbalist that way.
Okay, that is incredible. Guys, we'll put that in the show notes for you. Now, you mentioned really moving the needle on like blood work, on conditions that people have, which is so significant that herbs have the ability to do that. Like, it's not just masking or covering up. It can actually help restore the baseline of function. So that brings me to my next question, which is, say somebody starts using a nervine or an adaptogen and they start seeing improvement. Do they have to stay on these now forever? And if they come off, will they now just go back to the old symptoms that they had? Or have the herbs tonified or restored function to where they can actually come off and they still feel the benefit of it or the effects of it?
Yeah, I think it's sort of half and half. I do think the herbs tonify and restore function to an extent where you can really maintain that progress for a while because you're left in a far better place than where you started. And your body's in a bit more of a resilient state of homeostasis. It's not quite as stressed and depleted. But at the same time, herbs are here to sort of teach you what you need to do in order to have a result. So because herbs are very strong and are very powerful, they can push results. Again, they push neurotransmitters. So let's say you're doing passion flower or skullcap before bed. Those herbs are going to come in and change your brain chemistry, increase your GABA, which is a calming neurotransmitter. And they're doing that exogenously, right? You're looking to something outside of your body to do that, and you're getting a result. And maybe because you're calmer before bed and you're getting deeper sleep, you're going to see that you have more progesterone, and that's lovely, right? Your hormones are going to shift because you're having a less of a perceived experience of stress and less stress hormones. However, just because a plant can do that for you exogenously doesn't mean that you cannot also do that endogenously, right? So the plant is kind of teaching you, hey, this is what's possible for you. Here is what happens when your brain is in a calmer state and you're able to achieve a deeper, restful sleeping experience. And here's the impact it can make on your hormones. But in order for that to be a lifelong thing, you're going to need to change your habits. You're going to need to change your sleep hygiene. You're going to need to maybe read a book before bed instead of being on your phone so that you can mimic that endogenous experience of the increase of GABA in your brain without needing to rely on an herb forever. That's not how herbs are meant to be used. And in fact, I find that herbs have a little bit of a spicy personality where when you are leaning on them for too long, they're going to be like, oh, now I'm not going to work as well. Skullcap is notorious for doing that. I had a client who used skullcap religiously for sleep and it was unbelievable. And then one day it just stopped having the same effect. And I was like, ooh, now you have to find the things that actually get you into that state on your own. And that's the work. That's the hard part. Our health is always going to kind of come down to our personal responsibility at the end of the day. And often our health comes back to our nervous system more than anything else in every disorder, whether it's a GI digestive disorder, whether it's an autoimmune disorder. There's such a huge nervous system component at the root of all of these things that's part of the wisdom that the plants are giving us.
Oh, preach. So good. So good. And as you're saying it, I was like, this is like the information that everybody's like, oh, I was hoping you would tell me, just take them forever, because at the end of the day, like, we want results, but it can be really hard to change habits, especially if they've been something that have been in place in your life, or if they've been propping you up, because many of us have habits that they're essentially just behaviors that allow us to avoid pain in our life. It's just masking something else. And so we lean on things. We think we're doing something better for our body by bringing in an herb, because we're like, okay, it's plant medicine. But like you said, the plant's only going to go so far for you. And at the end of the day, you're left with yourself and your habits and what you're avoiding, and your nervous system plays a huge role in that. Like, you just can't outrun you. So at the end of the day, it is personal accountability and responsibility for your health. Utilize the herbs, but also realize that they're a tool to support you, but you in and of yourself have to be able to look at all of the pieces of your life and realize, what am I choosing? What is this supporting the goals for my life? Is this producing an outcome that is allowing me to live a life that I want to live? Or is this deteriorating my purpose?
And sometimes, like, the answers don't have to be as serious and as daunting as we think they are. Like, you talked about hair before, right? And so you were like, oh, I need your herbs for hair and yada, yada. And it's interesting because the herbs that help to strengthen and nourish your hair in Chinese medicine would be these blood building herbs. In Chinese medicine, hair is seen as an extension of the blood. So if your blood is really vibrant and healthy and nutrient dense, right? You have a lot of iron and B vitamins and minerals and nutrient reserves within your blood and within your body, your hair is going to grow strong and long and shiny. And so there are blood building herbs, right? You can take herbs to replenish your minerals, to tonify your kidney and your liver meridians, and to help put more life and chi into your blood and hair and move that blood to get to the scalp. But then you're like, okay, what do I need to do in my life so that I am not burning through and depleting my blood as much, right? Like, maybe I'm taking all of these herbs to rebuild the blood to help my hair, but every single day I'm consuming a ton of caffeine, which is actually kind of like burning through my blood and making me a little bit blood deficient. And so I'm like putting back, but then I'm also taking away and stressing my body out. But on the other hand, part of the spiritual philosophy of the blood in Chinese medicine is the juiciness in your life. It's like how much fun you're having in your life. And I think that we get so caught up in the wellness and the healing world that we forget that having fun is just as much a part of healing as anything else. And sometimes we can get too serious and too regimented and too myopic with our vision of what we need to do, and too strict with our bodies. And we end up depleting ourselves because we're not just letting ourselves experience life and let loose and have fun. So if your hair is not juicy, is your life not feeling super juicy? Are you not just like taking time to be silly and laugh with friends and not be so rigid? That's a big part of it too.
So good. That is so true. So, okay, since we're talking about hair, what are the hair herbs? Like, let's go there, because I personally am I need to know. I need the deets.
Yeah. So hair herbs in a Chinese medicine sense are going to be anything that nourishes the kidney and liver meridians, as well as the blood and the qi. So blood building herbs are going to be things like angelica, which is dong quai, which is going to nourish the amount of blood and fluids that we have in the body. And in Chinese medicine, again, blood and fluids is the language that they used when they would say blood deficiency. Nowadays, we'd look at that like, what can you actually measure in the blood, right? Iron, B12, all of these things that would make up really healthy oxygen and nutrient rich blood. So these are going to be these herbs that help to increase your absorption of these nutrients, as well as provide nutrients within the herb. So Dong Quai is one of them. Foti root is a great Chinese herb for the hair that helps to nourish the kidney meridian. And then when you look at Western herbs, they're going to be the very mineral rich, silica rich herbs like horsetail is a really wonderful herb for the hair. And horsetail, right? Like a horsetail is really healthy and shiny and thick. And this herb is full of minerals that also help to make up the mineral matrix of your hair. And then, of course, like eating enough protein and enough amino acids is extremely key, because in Chinese medicine, that's also part of the blood building picture. We need amino acids as like the building blocks of the proteins in our body. And it's also like protein is such a huge source of qi in the body, because we're constantly using energy and reserves to rebuild our tissues, and we need amino acids and protein for that. So the more protein that you're eating, and more importantly, digesting and breaking down into the building blocks of amino acids, the healthier your hair is going to be.
Okay. So good. And you have a product, I think it's called like is it Main Magic?
Main Magic. Yep.
Yes.
It's all Chinese herbs for blood building, liver, kidney, meridian. Essentially, they're adaptogens. They're kind of like blood adaptogens in Chinese medicine. They're very strengthening. A lot of people will utilize that formula when they're just like either super depleted and don't have a ton of energy, and they notice their hair is really dull or shedding a lot. Or people will even use that formula when their periods are getting really scanty and light. And they're like, oh, I'm actually seeing my blood deficiency, not just in my hair, but in my periods. And it can help to bring back those fuller periods and that healthier blood flow.
Okay. Yeah. I'm familiar with that product. I love it. Okay. And now that this is actually, I think this would be a great segue too, because there are certain herbs that we take in capsule form. And then there are certain herbs that are utilized in an oral tincture.
Yeah.
Maybe explain the difference, and if one is better than another, and why somebody would choose maybe a liquid oral tincture over a capsule.
Absolutely. I actually have a whole blog post about this, because this is one of the most common questions that I've gotten. So I'll send you that so you can put it in the show notes. It has a really big breakdown, like the types of herbs that are best for each. But essentially, let's look at tinctures, right? A lot of herbs have these alkaloids, right? These phytochemicals, especially if they're dense barks and roots. They have these alkaloid phytochemicals in there that need to sort of be released and become more bioavailable thanks to a solvent that helps to break down some of the density of that root bark, let's say. And so those heavy rooty plants, let's take dandelion root as an example, that would be a wonderful candidate for a tincture, because alkaloids are alcohol soluble. They don't really extract that well into water. Yes, you can take them as a capsule form, as like it just would be the dried ground powder of the root. But tincturing is kind of going a step further and making a lot of those plant chemicals more bioavailable and more potent, more effective. And then of course, because you're swallowing a tincture, that tincture is now exposed to like the entire surface area of the gut. And so the absorption is very quick, very fast acting, again, very potent, especially if you're able to take it on an empty stomach, if you don't have a sensitive stomach. So it's kind of the most potent way to take herbal medicine, tinctures. That's why I prefer using tinctures in my line. I have some capsule formulas, but tinctures are just so easy and fast, and people tend to feel a difference so quickly that they're like, oh my God, herbs work. And again, you always want to use them for those woody, dense roots. Then we look at water extraction, right? Like teas or even long decoctions, because if you are going to decoct a root, or you are going to make a root into the tea, which you can do, you need to decoct it again, because you need something to get those deeper phytochemicals out of the density of that root. And so in a decoction, it's just heat and time. A decoction is where you're bringing something to a boil, and then you're lowering it down to a simmer and maybe covering it and letting it simmer from anywhere from 20 minutes to 6 hours, right? So that heat and time can help to extract some of that deeper medicine. And a lot of the time, again, these dense plants, you need to do that. Even with something like ginger, it is a root. It's not quite as dense as dandelion root, but you need to have a little bit of a decoction to really get the strength of ginger. You can't just pour some water over it and steep it. And we've all tried to do that. It's not really that strong.
Yeah.
So, a water soluble herb would be something that's more leafy, really good for leaves, flowers, things where there's a higher concentration of more like aromatic medicine. So that would be like volatile organic compounds, like essential oils, something that's very aromatic, like lemon balm or like rose or lavender. These are plants where the aromatics, the essential oils, are kind of right at the surface. And that's more where their medicine is. And we don't really want too much heat or too much time, because we all know if you steep chamomile for too long, it actually gets really bitter and disgusting. So with leaves and flowers, a lot of the times you just want to steep it with hot water for a little bit to bring out some of that medicine and then drink it for that experience. And same with like these mineral rich plants. I had mentioned nettle and oat straw before. Oat straw is kind of like the first step before someone even goes to an adaptogen. A lot of times I find that people are almost too depleted nowadays, even for adaptogens, because adaptogens can be stimulating. They can help you to kind of like override the body signals for, oh my God, we need rest and nourishment, and can help you to kind of keep going. And for some people, that's actually not proper. Like that's not what their body needs. Their body actually does need to slow down and remineralize, renourish. So for someone who I can see is so sensitive, their nerves are kind of so fried, they're these kind of people where if there's a loud noise, they're like the one in the room that's jumping, and you can just tell that their nervous system needs that love and nourishment. I would go for something like an oat straw overnight infusion. So this is where you'd be taking a really large quantity of oat straw dried plant. You can get it dried, cut, and sifted. I like Mountain Rose Herbs. That's a great source, but there's a lot of sources out there. And you would fill a mason jar halfway with oat straw, like dried oat straw herb material. Then you'd cover that plant matter with just boiled water, really hot water, and kind of let it sit on the counter. You don't want to touch the jar right away. Once it's cooled down a bit, you're going to jar it, shake it, and leave it on the countertop overnight so that it can slowly steep all of its minerals into that liquid. And then when you wake up in the morning and you strain it, you're going to have this super mineral rich golden liquid that you can drink that's full of bioavailable calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, B vitamins, all of these different minerals that are directly depleted by stress. And if you drink that every day over a period of months, you can really start to nourish in a way that your energy comes back, not in a punchy way like with adaptogens, but in a way where you're like, oh my God, I have the capacity again. I want to go running, or I want to go do that thing that's hard because I finally have the space for it. So that's something where you would do like an overnight infusion. Same with nettle leaf, dried nettle leaf. If you're making an overnight infusion during allergy season, let's say, or even before allergy season, you'd want to consume an overnight infusion of nettle every morning for 2 or 3 months before allergy season begins. And it's going to totally knock out your allergies because it's kind of renourishing you after a long winter and giving your liver the nutrients that it needs to get rid of histamine.
Oh my gosh, this is so valuable. So many people right now are struggling so big with the pollen and the allergies, and they're always like, what can I take? What can I do? So this is new to me. This is like new recipes. Like this is so cool. So overnight, are there any that are supportive for detoxification? I mean, I know that nettle, like they're liver supportive, so maybe that there's overlap, but are there ones for people that have a lot of liver congestion or are poor detoxifiers that can do something like an overnight steeping of a specific herb that they could do first thing in the morning that really helps the lymphatic system, like as they're moving and just kind of flushing, you know, their kidneys and liver and everything? Because I do believe too that, like, especially after evening time or when you're sleeping in your body, the lymphatic system and everything is like detoxifying, like being able, some people will do like lemon water, which I think can be effective, but are there any other ones specific to detoxification that you find could be helpful?
Yeah. So the thing is, so for overnight infusions, when you're just leaving something on the countertop overnight, that is specifically just indicated for those mineral rich plants that are going to rebuild you. So when you're doing a morning tea for kind of like, waking up that detoxification, kind of depuffing the lymphatic system after you've been sleeping all night, especially if you are in spring and you're getting puffy and your liver and kidneys are a little bit sluggish after the winter, that would probably be more of these liver and kidney nourishing or detoxifying roots that you would want to make into a decoction. So
Okay.
I have a tea called the cleanser, which is a liver purifying essentially tea that has dandelion root, has burdock root, and has other supportive liver detox roots. And you would decoct that on the stove with that low simmer because it's going to take a little bit more intense heat to get those phytochemicals out.
Okay.
And you can drink the cleanser. Like I'll have people do the cleanser like every day for 30 days when they need a little bit of a liver reset or some liver support. If they're having a lot of symptoms of liver sluggishness, if they're having a lot of allergies, if they're having a lot of hormone or skin issues, they're breaking out a ton. 30 days of the cleanser tea in the morning can be an excellent, gentle reset because it's just opening up your detoxification pathways. And then I also have a tea called the Purifier, which is more lymphatic focused and has things like cleavers, which are wonderful for just gently moving the lymph because there's really not a lot of herbs that move the lymph. It's a rare thing. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that this it requires participation of actively working with the herbs to create the teas and stuff like that. Cause I always find that if you can create habits around a process that's going to nourish you, you actually I feel like you experience more. It's like taking a capsule. It's nobody thinks about it. There's just it's just one and done. But you create kind of an experience with the herbs. And to me, that actually plays into that nervous system regulation because it requires you to be pulled away from everything else. And now you get to experience making the tea and drinking it and having a moment to be able to enjoy it, and like you said, coming back to enjoying some of these processes that alone is going to do so much for your health.
There's so much of a ritual element, I think, to healing and to coming back to ourselves. And it's a tough balance to strike when you are an herbalist who's making commercial formulas that you want people to use and stick to so that they can actually see the results that they're going for. Yeah, giving people a capsule is a lot easier because in our modern world where even our time is kind of in the framework of capitalism where we're well, we don't have enough time because we need to be productive and working. That's sort of what we're trained to do is just take that capsule. Yeah. But if you can take a step back and sort of decondition your mind that just a capsule is going to do it for you. Sure, that can be helpful. It can be part of your regimen, but it's also going to take that nervous system regulation. It's going to take that relationship to yourself. It's going to take that relationship to the plants. There's something that happens when you're decocting your herbs on the stove and you're smelling them, right? You're actually you're kind of getting into this dance with them. You're having this olfactory experience. You're ooh, I've never smelled that note of the plant before. Oh, I'm really tasting the flavors. The flavor of a plant is part of the medicine. I mean, you look at these hepatic bitters, right? If we're trying to really hit some liver detox and we're trying to really help our detox pathways get rid of toxins and hormones and histamine and help with allergies and all these things, when we look at the hepatic bitter herbs or the digestive bitter herbs that are going to help to clear out some of that gunk, we actually have bitter taste receptors on our tongue that need to interact with the bitter alkaloids in those herbs in order to have a full body signaling experience, right? And we have these bitter taste receptors all throughout our body. When the bitter taste receptors are activated on the tongue, we also have bitter taste receptors that are activated on our lungs. And some of our lung bitters that can help with things like asthma work because of the bitter alkaloids. And then you take it back to the nervous system. When the body's bitter receptors taste that flavor, it helps to stimulate the vagus nerve and helps us to go into parasympathetic relaxation mode. So the flavor is part of the medicine. And I think the more that you can take herbs in either tincture or tea form, the deeper they're going to work and the more you're going to have an appreciation and a knowing of them.
Makes total sense, especially with the bitters, because I've noticed when I take the bitters, you've got a tincture called glucobitters. And I was telling you before, guys, if you're listening, if you've taken digestive bitters, you'll know. And I was kind of laughing because I just take everything straight. You should definitely probably dilute some of this stuff, but I'll just do it straight mostly because I'm lazy. I mean, I just am I'm that's fine. It'll make your eyes water for a moment, but all of that to say, when I take these bitters, I actually notice that I don't crave, like if I'm hungry, I can feel that I'm hungry. If I take it before a meal, I actually feel more satiated. Like I don't eat like I'm scarfing down. It like blunts kind of my appetite in a way that like I'm still hungry, but I'm not going to like rush through my meal or overeat. So there's definitely a mechanism there that influences your satiety and how you even consume your meal. Cause I think some of us like, we're like, end of the day and we're like starving, slamming down food. What is going on there? Because I know for a fact that happens. I've noticed when I take it and when I don't take it, I have a different experience in when I eat my meals.
Well, there's so many things that are happening there. The first thing I want to say, I just want to go back to that vagus nerve for a second. If you guys aren't familiar with the vagus nerve, it's the largest nerve in your body, essentially, like kind of innervates everything and is responsible for getting us into a state of safety in the body, essentially, and helping us to have a bit more of a digestive reflex, a digestive enzyme release, because we are truly in parasympathetic rest and digest. And there's a lot of different ways to activate your vagus nerve, singing or humming. I think even, the process of slowing down to say a prayer before your meal, I really believe activates your vagus nerve as well. I'm sure there's some sort of literature research on this, and it's part of that ancient wisdom as well. But just slowing down to get present, to say thank you for that meal, or even like you think back to cultures who would sing while cooking and there was like some sort of a humming or a singing moment. That is so important to stimulate your vagus nerve and get you to relax before your meal. And when you do so, when you truly slow down and become present before you eat your meal, you are so much more conscious of your hunger cues, of your satiation, of, do I really want another bite of this? Am I eating because I'm just rushing through my meal and I'm just kind of overriding my body's signals and I'm still stressed from the day? Or am I really paying attention to how delicious this bite is and when I'm full and can say I want to stop? So there's a nervous system piece, because with digestive bitters, whether it's the glucobitters formula that you were talking about, that not only has digestive herbs, but also has blood sugar lowering herbs. We'll get into why that's important. But even if it's another, just like a plain digestive bitters formula, like my digestive juice or any other company that makes a digestive bitters formula, the fact that you're tasting bitter herbs before your meal does the same thing, activates that vagus nerve and just gets you to slow down and be more present. Because if we're eating in that, oh my God, I just had a crazy day, I'm starving kind of state, and we're just like shoveling, we all do that, we've all done that. And we're like, wait, why did I eat that whole plate? Like I was full 5 minutes ago. So just the presence is really important. And even with clients, like I've had some clients where I've had them eat blindfolded, and just actually, like sometimes it takes that much to get people present and almost to give them a challenge where it's like, okay, you don't have your eyes available. You can't watch TV. You can't distract here. You have to be with each moment and each bite and each flavor of the meal. And it's amazing what even that exercise will do for you, where you don't even have to take digestive bitters because you're getting present and your body can release your digestive fluid. So I just want to say that, because I don't always want people to think, oh, I need to go buy the herbs. I need to go to the herbs first. Yeah. There's a practice of getting present, saying grace, eating a meal with a friend, lighting a candle. All of these things can actually help you before you spend any money. Yeah. But then to go to the satiation piece that you just talked about, where you're like, oh my God, my hunger signals actually completely change when I take these herbs. So you're talking about glucobitters specifically. And that is an herbal formula that I created for folks who have blood sugar dysregulation, metabolic dysfunction, and insulin resistance. And their hunger, and I'm speaking to myself here because that was the situation I was in. I created this for myself. I was having severely high blood sugar. I was pre-diabetic, and I was like, something needs to change. But when you're in a state of metabolic dysfunction and insulin resistance, your satiety hormones, your leptin levels, your cravings are totally off, and you are going to consistently crave sweet things, and you will be far less sensitive to the sweet flavor than other people even. And so what you need to do is actually work on that gut brain satiation hormone to help restore normal levels of it. And this is actually what we're seeing with very popular diabetes and weight loss drugs nowadays, right? So when you look at Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy, These are medications that have a synthetic, very powerful form of GLP-1, which is our body's endogenous satiation hormone that tells our bodies, hey, I feel safe, I'm satiated, I've eaten enough, I'm nourished, I'm good. You don't have to go into panic mode and seek for more or have all of these cravings. And while these medications have a very powerful, again, synthetic form that doesn't degrade the way that our own endogenous hormone degrades, we can also stimulate the secretion of our own GLP-1 in a far lesser amount, but still in a considerable amount to help those of us who are low in it, who are insulin resistant and metabolically deranged, to have healthier levels of this hormone. And so you can do this by taking bitters before meals. You can do this with select herbs like gentian and fenugreek and ginseng and bitter melon and all of these blood sugar balancing botanicals that are actually working by stimulating your own levels of GLP-1. So my formula glucobitters contains not only those herbs that help to stimulate your own GLP-1, help to stimulate your satiety levels, help to make you feel more full and have less cravings in general and feel more safe in your body. But they're also suspended in a solution of apple cider vinegar, which does a very similar thing, which helps with your satiety hormones, which makes you feel more full, and which even helps you to utilize carbohydrates more effectively. And so all of these herbs, they're working in different ways, helping your insulin sensitivity, helping your postprandial glucose response to the carbs that you did eat in that meal. And they're just helping you to have a more normal, essentially, reaction, a more normal appetite hormone picture to what you're eating by modulating this really powerful gut peptide hormone. And that's why all these drugs are targeting that peptide hormone, because it's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, listen, guys, you can get the effect of the GLP-1 agonist without the gastric paralysis if you just use, it's again, like they're peptides. I utilize peptides. I love peptides. I don't, but the Ozempic, Wegovy, Olive, Mounjaro, I've done other podcasts on that, guys, so I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole. But
yeah, it's just not everyone needs to go there if it's not suitable. Not that it's something that I would judge someone for. There's certain clients who have severe type 2 diabetes where they're at risk of kidney damage, and that might be a great drug for them if they're not going to make the lifestyle changes. But for those of us who are pre-diabetic, who have PCOS, insulin resistance, and you're right there, you just need that help because you genuinely are having trouble with your appetite hormones and you're feeling way hungrier than the people around you because your appetite hormones are off. Start with these herbal things first to help regulate that satiety and regulate that hormonal picture. And it doesn't even have to be herbs. Herbs are one way in. My glucobitters is one way in. If you just eat a huge dose of protein and fiber in that meal, you're also going to increase your GLP-1. If you have green tea before a meal, you're also going to increase your GLP-1. Even things like the red pigments found in berries help to increase your GLP-1. So there are so many compounds in natural whole foods that can also contribute to this picture of satiety. And that's really what we want at the end of the day. And we can get there. It's just going to take a little bit longer, and it's going to take really strategic choices.
Oh my gosh. This podcast, guys, there's so much. This is dense. This is a really informative podcast. I'm learning so much. And you bring up PCOS. We've talked a little bit about blood sugar dysregulation. I want to actually kind of pivot over to some other conditions that are really common, especially amongst women with hormones. What other herbs have you seen? Maybe if it's more inflammatory, like endometriosis, or women that just have dysregulated cycles or painful periods. What are some of your favorite herbs for the most common conditions that we're seeing amongst women?
So first, I just want to say I actually have a whole blog post on natural strategies to increase your own GLP-1 where I talk about the fiber, the berries, the green tea, all that. So I'll send that to you to put in the show notes as well. I'll have a bunch of resources for your listeners. But in terms of hormone pictures that are not necessarily related to high androgens, high testosterone, which is the PCOS picture, which comes from insulin resistance, there are other things, like you said, like just women who have irregular, painful cycles and really intense PMS, right? And usually that side of the spectrum is coming from estrogen dominance, right? And so a lot of women struggle with estrogen dominance. And this could be a situation where your actual estrogen levels are high. They are abnormally high, and your progesterone could be normal. Or this could be a situation where your estrogen is normal. There's no issue with your estrogen, but it is unopposed by progesterone because your progesterone is too low. So in that picture, it's nice to have lab work to go along with this, so that you can understand where you fall in that spectrum and don't just go by your symptoms. So if you know that you're estrogen dominant because your estrogen is too high, let's say, for example, in endometriosis, or just for someone who has high estrogen, you're going to want to do a lot of different things. Eating more fiber is huge, because fiber is what's going to actually bind and kind of suck up the excess estrogen that our body is trying to release through our bile. So it's really important, because the liver works so hard. The liver has these phase 1 and 2 detoxification pathways, and the liver is working so hard to transform compounds into fat soluble compounds that can be put into your bile and then squirted into your intestines so that they can hopefully be released through your bowels. So number one, before any liver support, you need to be moving your bowels. With any kind of hormone issue, painful periods, hormone imbalance, number one is correcting constipation first. And again, this is where someone could look online and say, oh, herbs for estrogen dominance, I'm going to take this herb. But they might be helped by just using the bathroom more frequently. That's like how granular and simple and foundational we need to get. And so often we're skipping ahead and wanting to buy something, but skipping the foundations, right? So number one, if you are not essentially excreting yesterday's food today, if you ate corn last night, you should be excreting all of that corn this morning in your first bowel movement. If you're still having corn in your stool that evening, the next day, even the day after that, that is a sign that you have slow motility. And you can do various tests to look at this. There's one test that utilizes food dye, like you eat a muffin that has blue food coloring in it and see how long that's in your stool. I don't love consuming a bunch of blue food dye. So you can do it with beets instead, right? You can eat some really pigmented beets or drink some beet juice and see how long that is in your stool. But you want it to be excreted the next morning. If it's not excreted all the way the next morning, you have slow motility and need to work on your constipation, even if you don't see yourself as a classically constipated person. But many people do. Many people are well aware that they are extremely constipated. So when we're starting there, we're looking at things as simple as drinking aloe, adding some marshmallow root powder to your oatmeal to just add some more mucilage and hydration to the gut, because a lot of the time we're constipated due to dehydration, and not just water dehydration, but actual like lubrication dehydration. Our mucous membranes are dry, and we can see that in our dry skin. It's often reflected in our skin or even in our hair. So adding marshmallow root to oatmeal, drinking some aloe juice, doing a castor oil pack in the evenings over your stomach with a hot water bottle on top. These are really simple remedies for constipation that can help your body to get rid of the estrogen that it worked so hard to put into that bile and excrete into your intestines. Because if it doesn't come out through your intestines and through your stool, guess what? That estrogen and all of those other toxins are actually going to get recirculated and reabsorbed through your intestinal wall and go back to the liver all over again and keep the liver busy with something that it already tried to excrete. So I can't stress enough that just correcting gut dysfunction and constipation is the number one thing that people need to look at. And the other side of it is that fiber can help you do that. So alongside your mucilage and your aloe and your maybe like stomach massage with your castor oil and calming down in the evenings to get in rest and digest and eliminate, you want to up your fiber intake. And the most fiber-rich food is not leafy greens. It's not even string beans or spinach, or like forget greens. It's beans. Beans are the most fiber-rich food in the plant kingdom. Cup for cup, gram for gram, ounce for ounce. It is unbelievable how much fiber beans have. And a lot of people have trouble digesting beans because we are so deficient in fiber. We're just not eating enough fiber. So we don't really have the gut ecology, the right bugs to digest them. So I always recommend that people start off with just a spoonful of beans at each meal, right? Like literally just crack a can of beans open, rinse them, drain them, put them in a Tupperware and close them in the fridge so that they're well preserved. But just one spoonful on top of breakfast, lunch, and dinner to start with, or even just breakfast to start with, and ease your way in so that you can slowly start to feed the gut bacteria that's required to break down that fiber. Then as time goes on and you can start adding more fiber to your meals, now not only do you have bulk for your stool and you're going to the bathroom more frequently, but because there's always fiber in your intestines, because now you're eating fiber at all 3 meals, there's always going to be a sponge in your intestines via that fiber to grab on to not just the estrogen, but all of the toxins that your bile is releasing into your intestines. So that is such a long-winded way to say that that's the number one thing you can do for hormone health. Once that's taken care of, maybe your liver does need more support in actually transforming those toxins and excreting them via bile. That's where you can enter liver herbs. I have a tincture called liver juice. Again, I have that tea called the cleanser. Things like milk thistle, burdock root, dandelion root. I'm sure you guys know them. These are going to be herbs that actually help to push and increase the activity of those phase 1 and 2 pathways so that you can get rid of more estrogen. And that alone, just correcting constipation and taking liver herbs, can be more than enough to help a woman who's having really painful, irregular cycles, a lot of PMS, a lot of breast tenderness, breakouts before her cycle. That could be more than enough. And then if we need to go a step further, if it's a woman who maybe has normal estrogen, but not enough progesterone, where it's a little bit of a deeper issue, or maybe high estrogen and low progesterone, a deeper issue, we would want to look at an herb like Vitex. Vitex, it's also known as chaste tree berry, is an incredible botanical that, again, works on a brain level. It works on an HPA axis level to help normalize levels of luteinizing hormone and to help you ovulate more regularly and more completely. So what happens is a lot of women who have low progesterone, they have very high levels of LH consistently. And because levels are always really high, when it comes time of the month to ovulate, usually the brain needs an LH spike to get the signal that, hey, it's time to ovulate. But because levels are already high, that spike doesn't look like a spike. So the brain doesn't ovulate, has an anovulatory cycle, has a delayed irregular cycle, and our ovulation time is all screwed up. And we need to ovulate to make progesterone. That's when we make it. So what Vitex does is Vitex actually normalizes levels of LH, brings them down so that when you have an LH surge, the brain is like, amazing. We're going to have really strong, healthy ovulation this month, and we're going to make progesterone because of it. And then over 3 to 6 months, it takes time, but over 3 to 6 months of taking Vitex, because ovulation is restored, progesterone gets restored.
That's okay. I was going to mention that too, because I have had a lot of success with Vitex or chaste tree berry. But there is, like, if this one's new to you, it takes consistent use for some length of time. So it's not going to be one that it's like, okay, I took it for a week. Like, my cycle's not bad. It's not restored, or my cycle's not normal. So yeah, it's a long-term play, but it's a very effective tool. And I've seen so much success with that one with a lot of women that they just have cycles that are just so wonky, and that has been incredibly effective.
Absolutely. And it's great for after birth control too. If you're off the birth control pill and you haven't gotten your cycle back and you're like, where the heck is this thing? Vitex is like my go-to herb.
Yes. Oh, this is so good. I mean, I'm so glad that you took a moment to break down what it looks like to clear estrogen and that whole process, because I think that many of us don't understand. We just look at hormones as values, but we don't realize that it has to be metabolized and excreted and this whole process. And so something like having bowel movements every day, if that is not something that is regular, that is dialed in, like, it will back up and affect all the other systems. So it might not just be that you're estrogen dominant. Like, you may have you may be like recycling a lot of hormone that you're not getting out. And so just addressing that can now help your hormones go back to baseline. So I'm really glad you're such a good communicator and teacher, because that really, to me, like, simplifies all the processes and gives us some actionable steps. Like these are things like adding beans. I'm going to have beans now for lunch because now that we talked about it, I'm like, I'm going to add that to my meal. I was thinking about what I wanted, but I know I have some beans, so I'm going to make some of those.
Just add them to every salad you make. Or just add them to your breakfast tacos. Like beans are an add-on. It's just, I always try to remember to add a scoop or two because they just make things so much better. And we don't realize how little fiber we're eating.
Yeah. Well, here's like a little hack for you guys. Okay. So for my kids, because getting fiber in kids sometimes is hard too. So there's a brand called Jovial and they sell different beans that are in glass jars. Cause I'm like very much like, if, buying beans in the can, BPA, all that stuff. So anyway, they have these little jars. And so I'll like, soak them, rinse them, but I'll add a little bit to a smoothie for them and they don't taste it, but it actually adds.
Yes. Beans and smoothies.
Yes. I know. Oh gosh, I can't ever show my kids because they'll be like, what? No, you're going to ruin my smoothie. I'm like, you don't realize I've been putting beans in your smoothie for months. Like you just don't but it adds like a creaminess to it. But
it does. I have a friend, Shyla. I think her Instagram is Healthy Shyla. She's a registered dietitian and she talks about bean smoothies all the time. No, you can also do like black bean brownies for your kids. Like you can use beans when you're making brownies or cookies. Like they're actually just like so flavorless and really creamy.
Yeah. Honestly, they are. There are definitely ways, like if you're like, I just don't like beans, like there are ways that you can add them and even a small amount will go a really long way. And I think that is I think because there's such a movement towards like keto carnivore and like high protein, like people are just not getting a lot of root vegetables. And people are also so stressed. They're like, okay, well, I can't eat any vegetables because their stomach acid's so low because they're so stressed out all the time. And so they fear eating things that have a lot of fiber because of the digestive upset. So I think by breaking some of these things down and even adding it to something like a smoothie, you're taking a lot of the digestive work off of your body because it's now even broken down more that even if you have to take some enzymes or you're taking glucobitters or something similar to help build stomach acid, like if you are compromised, you can still benefit from it. Just think about it as like, how do I make this? If I know that I'm compromised, I know that like things aren't digesting well, how can I still get the nourishment to my body with it being the least amount of work possible and do it in small baby steps? Like be gentle with yourself in that process, but you'll be amazed at how effective it is. Even just a little bit goes a long way.
I couldn't agree more. It's how can I support my body in doing this good thing? I know that beans are going to help me. And I know that I'm usually pretty nervous system activated before my meals. And I'm even worried about digesting these beans. How can I get myself into a state where I'm going to have the best digestion of these? And how can I maybe use a digestive aid to help me start adding this food to my diet? And you'll be surprised. In the beginning, you might need glucobitters or you might need some kind of a digestive bitter to help with your stomach acid or your gut bacteria. But over time, the more you actually eat the beans and up your fiber and correct your intestinal ecology, the more you'll be able to eat them without any supplement. And that's really what I want people to take from this episode more than anything is all of the things that we talked about that are not related to taking anything, that are just involving having a better relationship with your body and like really sitting down and being present with your food. Again, saying grace, taking deep breaths before your meals, even having good posture while you're eating can do so much for your stomach acid and your digestion. Correcting your constipation, again, with fiber or with just like little hacks to your oatmeal or doing a castor oil pack before bed to help with like the big picture of your hormones before you try a supplement, and finding ways that you can wind down before bed and optimize and have some deeper sleep, because that's going to help everything else. So really just going back to the basics, auditing your basics. Where is my pain point? Where's my Achilles heel? Is it my sleep? Is it that I'm not digesting anything? Is it that I'm having a really intense perception of the stress in my life? And if so, how can I slow down and take more time with myself to maybe journal about it or let it out in a productive way? There's so many things that we can do on the nervous system side and on the basics side before we throw a supplement cabinet at things.
Oh man, this is so good. And that's such a balanced approach to health, which is always what I feel like. And I've been guilty of trying to throw a supplement cabinet at my body. I'm like, okay, body, you're not holding up your end of the bargain here. So here's a bunch of, expensive supplements. Like, you better get with the program. And like, that's just not a sustainable approach. And that's really not looking at your body and honoring it for what it's doing for you. It's really just like kicking it down the road and expecting it to perform for you and manage stress loads that it wasn't designed to handle. So I think that's a really holistic mindset to have when it comes to just longevity, like not, healing, but also just how do you want to experience life in the coming years and decades? Like, we don't want to be constantly fixing problems. You want to be able to sustain a level of health so that you can enjoy that. Like, your life isn't disrupted because you beat your body up for so long and now you're paying the price for it.
And the supplements can be helpful, right? But before and those are like great tools. It's good to know what supplements help your body. It's good to know what tools you have in your arsenal when your body is being stubborn and you're like, okay, you could really use some help right here. This herb is actually perfectly indicated for you and it's meant to help you in this situation. Yeah. But first, it's just asking, did I get any sunlight today? Do I need to actually correct my sunlight hygiene? Do I need to call a friend? Do I need more social connection? Am I having enough fun? It's just making sure that you have that checklist first. And then, you're like, you know what? I know, like clockwork, no matter what I do the week before my period, I'm getting these annoying blemishes and I'm feeling PMS. So I'm going to take my liver supporting herbs that week before my period to just give me some extra support. But knowing when to bring them in and then when you're good. And then when you can also work on dietary changes and have a balance and have kind of like a plan to get off of these things or be able to just use them as tools.
Yeah. Summarized it so well. You just really like encapsulated all of that so beautifully. Guys, if you're listening, I know our show notes will be full with so many resources, but check out her podcast too. It's called What the Juice. I've listened to so many episodes and some of them I've listened to more than once because there was just so much great content that was covered in there. So if you're not familiar with her platform, her social media is always, a great place for resources too, but your podcast is an exceptional tool for us to be able to continue learning. And I didn't even realize when we started, we're like the organic yin and yang. I'm organic Blondie, you're organic Olivia. So I didn't even realize that until, the end of the episode here. But,
I love it. I love it. Blonde and brunette is always a killer duo. I can't wait to follow you now and check out all your stuff. I'm so excited.
Yeah. Well, it's, it's a hodgepodge. Sometimes you get dogs and kids and sometimes you get coffee enemas. So you never know.
Love it.
The spiciness, you just, it's Russian roulette. So anyway, keeping it interesting.
Awesome.
Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to drop all of the links of where we can find Organic Olivia, her store, which we talked about several of those different products and herbal formulations. I've used them. I still use them. I love them. So I can tell you from a personal perspective that they're great tools and they do work. And I just love the education that's behind them because she's not just selling things. She's also talking about how and why you would use something. So if you're looking to understand herbs on a more personal level, make sure you check out all of her resources on her website and her store and social channels and podcasts and all the things. So if you love this episode, we'd love to know how it's helped you, how it's serving you. Drop us a DM, leave us a review, all the different things. But Olivia, thank you so much for joining us here today. It was such a treat to have you.
You are the coolest, and I so appreciate your kind words. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on the next episode.